Hi everyone, I'm Uzra Dawood, President and Founder of Lean in Pakistan, here at the Barak Center, our headquarters, having the pleasure to interview the incredible, amazing Sadaf Rehman, who is an e-coding and e-coding training guru for e-education. But she's going to explain all that much better than I could in the next few minutes. And she's also chairing the Lean in Pakistan and especially the Lean in Lahore e-coding circle and e-education circle. So welcome here, Sadaf. We are thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be featured on this platform. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know you're such an incredibly busy person. We're really honored to have your time and such a pillar of the Lean in Pakistan community as one of the main women in e-education in Pakistan.
Thank you. It's been such an honor to play any kind of role supporting this really important space. And of course, Lean In has such a global presence. It's just such a pleasure to be a part of such a network and share our learnings with this very small but growing community. You had asked for an introduction to myself. So I've been working for 20 years in Pakistan in the social impact for youth space, particularly around education and skills training. In the last 20 years or so, I would say half, around 10, has been spent in the low cost education or low cost schools market, where I was supporting a really large chain of private low cost schools in Pakistan create and carve out and implement national projects related to high quality education. I went on to work in a global team where I was heading this skills training related work. And we were serving as technical advisors to one of the provincial governments, again, in this really important space of skills training. And I've recently started my own startup. It's a coding literacy for children startup called codeschool.pk, and where we're working on the same niche vertical of providing computer science and specifically programming education for children between ages 6 and 16 years.
So impressive. And Sadaf, why don't you talk a little bit about what it was like for you as a little girl? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Karachi, and that's where we kind of spent most of our. I spent all of my life there before I moved to Lahore. I if I had to kind of put a word to it, I was a nerd. I loved school. I loved studying. I particularly loved math and all the numbers kind of subjects, and just really enjoyed and thrived in an academic environment. I remember when I was 8. I remember it like yesterday. Actually, we used to queue up. It's in the 80s, the late 80s. We used to queue up and go into a computer lab where we would, on one of these really ancient MS-DOS kind of black screen computers, do logo, which is moving a little triangle around the screen. And that was just one of the most exciting highlights of, third grade. But what really that was doing was creating the germs for what is now code school, because that kind of education, that kind of learning early on in a game-based environment was just so much fun. And what I've realized, what's been lost in computer science education, particularly in primary and secondary school since then, has been this, right? It's been made into a very boring subject, if it's even being taught at all, and not really kind of harnessing the power and the fun of playing games, which is what we're trying to do.
That is amazing. And when you were little, you were always drawn to STEM.
Always. And I remember there were times I went on to do my computer science undergraduate here in Lahore as well, with a minor in math. And there were many people. I remember when we used to walk out of our first computer science freshman year, first computer science course, CS 101. And our first assignment, I remember walking out with maybe there were 100, people in that class, and a huge bunch going, "We're never going to do this again. This was the most difficult assignment we've ever done, and we are changing our streams completely. We're moving to economics or whatever." And I remember looking at that assignment going, "That was so much fun. I think that was awesome. I want to keep doing this for the next 4 years. This is amazing."
That's really, really inspiring. Not just that you were drawn to this particular field, but that you were very much in tune with who you were.
Absolutely. Actually, there was a bit of a dichotomy, to be honest with you, because while I enjoyed studying it and I really kind of the math part or the logic or it all really resonated with me and I really enjoyed it. When I graduated, I never worked in the computer science field. I went into a completely different industry, which is social change and youth and education related, right? And that I think was because way back then, this is before social media. This is in 2000. I graduated in 2003. I didn't really see anyone around me that looked like me or was like me and was in that industry. In fact, whatever tech houses, whatever few tech houses existed, I didn't even really know of that many, or maybe IT departments within larger companies. It was almost like I felt this very strong, like, no, that's not me at all. That's not something that I would want to be a part of or want to be. And I think that's why, platforms like Lean In, platforms like, a lot of these women, gender specific platforms for women in tech are so important. It's so that younger women today can have an idea of what it's like to be in the sector. They can see a path and they have somebody who can help them along the way, because there are so many pressures, powers, people without realizing it that can kind of take you out of the industry so quickly, that unless you have a lot of support and guidance and mentorship, you're not going to be able to survive it. I hope things are different for the younger generation, though.
Well, you're definitely a role model, especially in your sector, for young people to look up to. So that's definitely changing as we speak. You had, we discussed how much you enjoyed Sheryl Sandberg's book Lean In, and that you did read the book cover to cover. Can you talk a little bit about what that book meant to you?
Absolutely. I've read both. I've read Lean In and Plan B. I just felt like it was such an aha moment. Is that what we call it? Because I was around a decade into my career at that point, and I was leading an organization. I was leading a department. I had a lot of women. I just had my son, and I had just gone through such a series of um, difficult circumstances, trying to find a work environment that was conducive to me as a working mother. And I was senior enough to be able to kind of, negotiate or know what I was asking when I was in the interview stage, or negotiate the kind of requirements that I had in terms of flexible work time or daycare or transport or whatever it was that I felt like I needed to support me as a young mother. But even then, despite all the positive policies some of the organizations had, they were terrible, terrible places to work. Not because the HR policy didn't exist, it was because the mind of the manager who you are working very closely with, or the people around you, or senior management, just simply don't understand what it's like to have a young child. They just don't know what the requirements are, and they're quite intolerant of whatever needs you have. And that can be very exhausting very, very quickly. And it can be unintentional. I'm not saying that there were people maliciously trying to kind of weigh you down or kick you out of the workplace. These were well meaning people that were good people. But through ignorance or through a lack of understanding of having been in that same situation, or a lack of empathy perhaps, they ended up saying things or doing things that were incredibly demoralizing to a young mother. And so I think what I found was that the people, so initially in the start of my career, I would be looking at the work when I was interviewing, right? I would see how great is the work, how is it not, what am I going to do, is it interesting, is it a progression or not. I think the turning point kind of came when I started looking at the people that I would be working with. And it was almost like I felt like I was interviewing them to see whether I would want to work with them or not, or whether they would be understanding or not. And I have been really, really blessed to have some amazing, incredibly supportive companies and people. So they do exist. It took a little bit of finding, but I feel like I could not be where I am in my career had I not had that kind of support and understanding.
It's really heartening to know. And what, Sadaf, has been some of the challenges you've been facing?
So many. But is there a specific kind of challenge? Is it the one like for being a woman? Or you had actually initially asked about lean in. So I was leading, and so this is the difference that it makes when you are someone who understands. So I remember this story about sitting at the table, right? Like the book Lean In talks about making sure that women sit at the table. And there's an incident that I still remember where Sheryl Sandberg is, telling these two women that are sitting on the corner of a conference room, come and sit at the conference table. And they said, no, 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 we're not going to be a part of it. Thank you, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. And they just kept sitting at the side and said, come and sit at the table. There have been so many rooms that either I have been there at the side of the corner, not wanting to sit at the table, or been at the table and then calling my female colleagues to come and sit at the table and them saying no. It's such a real and current and unfortunate thing that happens to this day, that I think it just made me so much more aware of it and make sure that I do represent a valid point of view, even if I feel like I don't, and that I should come to the table and I should make my voice be heard because it does add value. I remember another really interesting incident from the book. It was I think it was Lean In. And this actually happened with my direct reportee. She had gotten married and moved to the UAE, and she had asked for lesser work hours. So she wanted to go not part time or not flex time, but she wanted a reduced workload, or a reduced role. And then she said, eventually, I'm going to want to not take on a more management role or the next promotion. I'm going to actually be thinking of leaving. And when I started talking to her about it a little bit more, what she had in her mind was that she is eventually going to get pregnant, she is going to have kids, and then she may not be able to manage work at that point in time. And she had just gotten married. And then I asked her, are you planning to have kids? She said, no, not right now. I was like, all right, then why are you saying you don't want the promotion if you're not even sure if you want to have kids? It just makes no sense. And so, just kind of giving her that little push in saying, you can do this, you should take that promotion, you can do it. And if and when a time comes that you cannot, you will then take it from there. After that, we will figure things out together. And if you can't, leave. It's as simple as that, or move to another role that works more for you. But don't reduce what you can do right now based on some unknown future, which may or may not, hinder you. It's just it was something that is mentioned in the book Lean In as well, which I actually had play out in my life. So I thought that was very, very interesting how across the world, how universal all the things that women think from all the different cultures they are, there's still a lot of universality in the message.
Absolutely. And Sadaf, in particular, your journey is so unique, particularly because your field is so unique. And what would you have done differently looking back?
So honestly, when people say that I am a woman in tech, I still kind of look around and say, who's the woman in tech? I don't think it's me, which is, to this day, after 20 years after having my own kind of tech startup, I still do feel a little bit of an imposter syndrome. I think it's a lifelong struggle. I would have loved to have a lot more confidence in what I wanted to say because I had a valid viewpoint. I was just too hesitant to express it, and I felt unwelcome in speaking. I felt like I was too young and too female to speak, and I think I would have, if I had to do it again, I would have said all the things that I wanted to say or expressed a lot better what I wanted to say in all those places that I felt deeply uncomfortable doing so.
And would you therefore advise someone else to express what they're thinking at those moments?
100%. I've noticed that younger women today are a lot braver, at least in the very small kind of pond that I've interacted with. I think perhaps it's less of an issue, but if there is somebody who feels like they are um, uncomfortable speaking in a room or feel like their opinion might not be valid just because it's different, I would say that's exactly when they should be speaking because that difference in viewpoint is exactly what makes it so valuable.
Well, absolutely. That's all the whole principles behind diversity and inclusion. But what would you advise someone who does speak and things go wrong?
Oh gosh, so that's a tough one, right? Like that's a tough one. Obviously, you have to navigate. You have to learn how to navigate a space and have enough, social IQ or social quotient to be able to know what is the best way of presenting things or being able to read a room. I've often erred after a certain time. I've often erred on the side of just saying what I'm saying, regardless of how it's going to be received in the room, and that kind of comes with a little bit of seniority and a little bit of experience as well. So I feel like I can get away with it. Um, if there is fallout, I would recommend that anyone who's facing that fallout, based on what they've said, think through: was it because of the way they said it? Could it have been said better? Could it have been said in a different context or in a better place? For example, should it have been said in front of 15 other people? Could it have been done one on one? Would it have been received better? If it was and they were valid and they said whatever situation, social context was correct, and it could not get received by that other person positively, is there a way to manage the fallout? Because it's not in the speaking, it is in the outcome. It is the result. Like, what is the result that we're trying to achieve? If that result is getting hindered based on the way that the communication took place or whatever the way the communication was received, then that's counterproductive. And in order to make effective change and to get effective change, you're going to have to get better at navigating and making your point heard in a way that it actually resonates and change comes about. Otherwise, it's not sustainable.
No, absolutely. And I think that's one of your definite skill sets, Sadaf, and why you've made it so far. Can you share a little bit about your dreams and where you want to get to next in your journey?
Oh, that's such a good question. So if we think about it, we are at an inflection point in the world today. Pakistan has more young people in Pakistan, more young people today than in the history of the country, right? In the world globally, we have 1.8 billion children, 1.4 billion of which are in school, and yet education reform is just so critical. We're sitting in the 21st century and we're still teaching in classrooms that were designed in the 19th century. And so we haven't really reformed or adapted enough to be able to equip our kids with 21st century skills. And this is not a conversation. This is a conversation we've been having since the 90s, right? We're 23 years into the 21st century, and yet we are still, I would say, in a place where this is education trope, right? Like if Rehman Winkle was to kind of wake up today, he's the guy from a fairy tale that slept for 100 years. He'd be amazed by cell phones and he'd be amazed by TVs and all kinds of technological advancements. But if he was to walk into a school, he'd be like, "Oh, that's really familiar," because education in classrooms almost look exactly identical to as they did 100 years ago. And so I think whatever work I do will definitely be contributing towards that. My interpretation so far has been for Pakistan specifically, there was an education or enrollment crisis, which we've become better at and resolved. Uh, uh, what the next crisis is going to be is quality learning outcomes. So we have kids in school, but are they really learning? And until and unless, and the conversation right now is centered around literacy and numeracy. Our kids are illiterate and illiterate despite being in school, but no one is really talking about, so what's going to happen? What is, yes, reading and writing is critical, but what is going to make them productive members of society? And until and unless we introduce computer science education as an equally important literacy to reading and writing, I don't think we're going to really see any traction. And so this is the inflection point right here. If not now, we should have done it 20 years ago. But if we haven't, we need to do it now. And I see myself working in that for the next 5 to 10 years for sure.
No, absolutely. And this is something we've discussed about because of Educate a Girl and the work I'm doing in that space. And although you're absolutely 100% correct, when you enter a classroom, it's the same as it was in previous generations. When Susan Cain came out with her book about, introverts and the different way people interact and learn, there was a lot of talk of changing office spaces. And classrooms have been very slow to follow up on that. But what's really fascinating is that so much was done in the learning about the merit system. And they started having children have no right or wrong answers and no grades in many institutions. And then they said now 20 years have gone by of that, and they're finding that a lot of people are lower work ethic and more entitled. And that's some of the information that's now coming across in education circles. So where you're at with e-learning, it's quite fascinating because you're at the cutting edge of changing spaces in Pakistan. And one of the things to do in Educate a Girl, of course, is use technology to help those who don't have access to school to have access to learning, and particularly during COVID. And your work in your startup, and now your startup is a full-fledged business, has been so critical in this. Perhaps you can talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, kids today, the kids that are in school today are going to graduate into a workplace where 65% of jobs haven't even been invented as yet, right? So I think that's it no longer is about using tech or teaching tech. It's about equipping minds with how to think and adapt so that they can survive whatever changes come down the line as they are working. And teaching people how to think is a lot harder than it looks. It's a lot harder to do, it's a lot harder to measure, it's a lot harder to plan for. However, tech obviously is front and center to this. Now, within tech, there are two ways of interacting with it. One is the one that you mentioned, right? Which is you deliver a program to those who need it most through tech, right? That's a tech enabled, that's a delivery system. Using tech as a delivery system. you also have actual kind of tech skills where you bring somebody in person to learning face to face, as you have to with a lot of younger kids, right, who can't really interact with computer screens as well, and teach them certain digital skills or certain computer literacy skills, or whatever the tech skill would entail. And then what we're doing is at Code School is somewhere in the middle. What we're trying to map out is what coding or teaching a tech skill will look like in a low resource environment like Pakistan, where the majority of the country does not have internet, does not have computers or laptops, and coding unfortunately cannot be done on a smartphone. You can do micro entrepreneurship. Women can sell embroidered clothing or pottery through WhatsApp or through Facebook or through Instagram. But children cannot learn how to code until and unless they're doing it on a specific device. And then you also have another low-income country context where you have teachers that do not know programming, or teachers that do not have are not grounded in the fundamentals of what they're trying to teach, not just in one subject, but I think that's an issue that's across the board. And then you add it in with a lot of other things like no buildings, no electricity, no computer labs, no the route on which you have to walk to school is dangerous. There are no bathrooms in the school, so girls need to leave the school, and that's also dangerous. So we're operating in a very difficult environment. And then what does it look like? What will a program look like, and what will it be? So we're very early stage, so I won't say we have the answers. We are an idea right now, and we're an innovative idea, and time will tell whether it's scalable and getting kind of learning outcomes that we need or not. But one of the things that I know for sure, because we've tested this, is that a child, no matter how poor they are, or even if they've never interacted with any kind of phone or laptop before, can be taught coding within an hour. They can be taught how to code. We have seen it. We have seen them understand code fundamentally. We've seen them make little mini games almost immediately using low code platforms like Scratch. And the issue is almost never in the mind of a child. So just because a child is poor does not mean we have to give them poor education. I think the idea is that we need to be able to bring up the system, bring up or uplift the system so that it can serve the needs of our kids, especially in places like Pakistan, which will house a majority of the world's children in the next 100 years.
Yes, we're a young country. We're a young country, and that's such important work. I definitely want to thank you for all that you do for the children of Pakistan, for Pakistan, and of course for Lean In Pakistan and being such a pillar of the women in these circles. Thank you so much, Sadaf, for your time. It's been amazing speaking to you today.
It's such an honor to speak to someone as inspirational as yourself on a platform as inspirational as Lean In. And just thank you for giving my ideas a voice. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.